Hi, everybody. This is Kara Parfit, Manager of Marketing and Sales Support here at Cerdant, and I just want to thank you all for taking the time out of your busy day to join us here for this webinar on preventing malware using SonicWall's Capture ATP feature. Your presenter today is going to be Jason Palm. He is a Senior Network Engineer here at Cerdant. Jason has actually been working in technology since the 90s, which makes him significantly older than I am. I just want to point that out. During the time, he's actually worked at various levels, from startups, nonprofits, multinational corporations, but here at Cerdant, as a SonicWall expert, he holds multiple SonicWall certifications as well as active certifications from Cisco, Silence, as well as a few other entities. Jason has actually been part of the Cerdant team here for about 3 years now, and he is primarily a member of our deployment team, but he also serves as our team lead for another product we support as well, Silence. But obviously, primarily, our business that we provide for you is SonicWall expertise and management. So we're happy to be presenting on SonicWall's newest advanced threat protection feature, Capture ATP. So without further delay, I will turn things over to Jason, but during the presentation, please feel free to type your questions into the webinar console, and we'll have some time at the end of the presentation to get those answered for you. Jason?
All right, thank you, Kara. As Kara mentioned, I'm a Senior Network Engineer here at Cerdant, and today we're going to be discussing one of SonicWall's newest services, Capture Advanced Threat Protection, or what we simply refer to here as Capture. So I'm just going to be giving you an overview of how you can capture more and fear less. I know how much everyone loves looking at PowerPoint slides, so I'm going to try to keep those to a minimum. I will follow the slides which explain the service and how it fits in today's threat landscape with a demo of what Capture looks like running on a SonicWall. And then if we have time at the end, I'll take any questions. So as Kara mentioned, go ahead and submit those questions as we go. And at the end, we'll answer those for you. So let's get started. So really the major catalyst for today's webinar was Cerdant's recent annual security conference. Some of you viewing this presentation were able to attend that event, which allows us to meet and interact with our current customers. I will say that's definitely one of the annual highlights for all of us here at Cerdant. As many of you know that have been with us for a while, we maintain a very close relationship with our customers, so it's great to not only be on a first-name basis with you over the phone, but then to have that chance to meet people and really get a feel for what you think of the service or what's affecting your networks is a huge bonus for us. So, you know, if you haven't been to one of our conferences in the past, I would definitely encourage you to consider future invitations. You'll see the link at the bottom right of this slide, which we will make links available after the presentation. It actually takes you to a page which gives a recap of that event. But to give you an overview, throughout the day, we had multiple presentations from Mike Johnson, our president, on the Cerdant State of the Union, the current threat landscape. Josh Skeens, our director of engineering, gave a presentation on how to put the security odds in your favor. Jeremiah Johnson, our principal engineer, presented on SSL decryption and inspection. Dmitry Repetov, the product manager with SonicWall, was here in Dublin, and he spoke on the state of SonicWall and the upcoming roadmap as well. I also presented on the topic we will be discussing today, but with more time, we will have some time to take a deeper dive and discuss the service in light of some recent events. So the conference, as you can see here, took place on May 11th. And one of the common themes for each presenter were stern warnings on the rise of ransomware and zero-day threats. So much so that by the time I concluded the day with my presentation, I literally felt compelled to apologize to attendees for bringing up those terms again. The fact is, however, everyone presenting prepared independently, which really underscores just how serious we as a team and an organization were taking these threats. So May 11th, we had our security conference, and does anyone recall what happened the following day on May 12th? Literally, we had a huge news flash for WannaCry. So beginning on Friday, May 12th, what amounted to a worldwide cyber attack by the WannaCry ransomware crypto worm began infecting computers. So within a day, it was reported to have infected more than 230,000 computers in over 150 countries. Many customers contacted us to confirm that they were protected, which, if you are a SonicWall subscriber, you actually had signatures for WannaCry automatically pushed to your firewalls on April 20th. The uncanny timing really wasn't lost on our customers, however, as we had many conversations with those who attended the conference the day before that jokingly inquired if we were actually behind the outbreak, which I can definitely assure you we were not. As expected, though, it wasn't long before headlines were made again. So very recently, on June 27th, Petya ransomware was huge news due to another global cyber attack. This prompted us to release a blog post titled "Ransomware Defense is the New Norm." You can see the URL listed here. And really what we were trying to do was update our customers on how they should be preparing to deal with these persistent threats. So we just kept the conversation going, decided that the webinar was in order to address some of this stuff and let you know what you can be doing to make sure that your networks are actually protected. So let's talk about some of the challenges. Really the major challenge is that it is easier now, more than ever, to create malware that has never been seen before. Thus, we're talking about the ability to bypass traditional signature-based detection. And since it is so easy, it's really no problem for hackers to repackage their threats and launch them again once they have detected signatures, or once they have been detected, and then response teams have been able to create signatures based on some patient zero detections. So the rapid increase in zero-day threats is also fueled by the profitability of ransomware. You may have heard the term ransomware as a service. If you haven't, it is actually a real thing. It's making it very easy and affordable for people to launch successful malware campaigns, ransomware campaigns. When you have some time, I would encourage you to do a quick search for Satan ransomware, a quick lookup, and you'll start finding just how easy it is for anyone to create their own cryptoware campaign and start extorting money. There are now actually entire business models built around this industry, including customer service. So it really is a one-stop shop for anyone that wants to start rolling out some ransomware campaigns. According to the 2017 SonicWall Annual Threat Report, the SonicWall Grid Threat Network observed a mind-boggling increase in ransomware, from nearly 4 million attack attempts in 2015 to 638 million in 2016. So I just want to stop and actually repeat that. 2015, there was 4 million attack attempts. 2016, 638 million attack attempts. You can see in the graphic at the bottom left here that there were 266.5 million in the fourth quarter of last year alone. Now, the increase in SSL, TLS traffic is a huge issue, and one we've been trying to address with all of our customers. Increased encryption is great for privacy purposes. You know, when you go to a banking website, you see the little green padlock icon. That makes you feel safe that your banking information isn't being viewed by somebody that shouldn't be viewing it. But the flip side is that it is being leveraged by cyber criminals to deliver malware variants. So the decryption and inspection of traffic is now a necessity. So having a solution like a SonicWall that can incorporate decryption, or what we call DPI-SSL for Deep Packet Inspection over Secure Sockets Layer, it is a key component of dealing with these threats. So I want to take a little bit of time, and I want to be very clear here. Without utilizing DPI-SSL, you are losing the ability to scan encrypted traffic that is traversing the gateway with your existing security services. Even a simple service like content filtering simply will not work on encrypted traffic. The SonicWall estimate, as you can see here, is that 62% of total web connections in 2016 were SSL TLS connections. That's a 38% increase from the year before, and this number will continue to go up. There actually are concerted efforts by organizations that are working with the goal of having 100% of web traffic encrypted. So going back to our security conference, I mentioned that our principal engineer, Jeremiah Johnson, spoke on this subject. We don't have the time to take a deep dive into DPI-SSL for this webinar, but if you're interested in discussing this further, let us know. I'm sure we may even be able to get JJ to do a webinar or one of our other engineers to do a webinar. Just don't tell them that I volunteered their names. This is a feature that does require the proper planning and management, and our team simply has more experience deploying it and using it successfully than anyone else. So please get in touch with your Cerdant reps so that we can at least have a discussion on utilizing this in your environment. We're also no longer just dealing with Windows environments. Android is a popular and prime target, for example, and it is susceptible to multiple threats. So we have to account for multiple operating systems when planning our defense strategies. Sandboxes. A few years ago, sandboxes were a very hot item in dealing with zero-day threats. Those solutions have really seen a serious decline in efficacy as new strains of malware are able to avoid sandbox analysis and detection, in most cases simply by recognizing they're running in a virtual environment and then changing behavior accordingly. So let's go back to the WannaCry attacks for a moment. How many of you heard about the WannaCry kill switch? This was actually a sandbox evasion tactic that was built into the code. Many virtual sandboxes will simulate an internet connection, for example, in order to trick the malware into thinking that it's still connected to the internet and thus able to contact command and control servers, for example. If you look at your screen, there is actually an URL listed here that the WannaCry authors included in their code. As you can see, it's basically just a random keyboard matching URL that was not a registered domain. So if the WannaCry software was able to contact this URL, they would know it was a simulated reply and they would not detonate and encrypt the systems. It just so happened that a security researcher observed the traffic and registered some of these domains and really by accident activated what everyone started calling the kill switch. It's interesting, if you continue to read up on some of the WannaCry post-outbreak events, you'll even find some interesting details on the war that was being waged over this. Attackers began initiating a Mirai botnet to DDoS these domains, basically trying to take them offline and in effect kill the kill switch. Here at Cerdant, we were also working to make sure our customers were protected. Our Director of Engineering, Josh Skeens, was able to compile a list of the WannaCry domains, and we were then able to work with SonicWall directly to ensure that those were addressed properly by their content filtering service, basically ensuring any infected machine would not be prevented from the kill switch domains. As far as we know, none of our customers were affected by WannaCrypt, but for example, some ISPs, when they started seeing an influx or an uptick in the traffic to these domains or other vendors, they would actually block the traffic, inadvertently preventing those machines from getting to the domain, activating the kill switch, and effectively encrypting and ransomwaring those machines. So those were a lot of challenges, obviously, and I want to talk now about the actual solution because we do have solutions. And that solution to this challenge is Capture Advanced Threat Protection. Spoiler alert, obviously we think it is awesome. It was named CRN's Network Security Product of the Year for 2016, and it is a service that we here at Cerdant are recommending to all of our customers and one that I feel is an absolute necessity. We've actually been beta testing Capture for well over a year before it actually hit the market, and as soon as it was made available for beta testing, we were on top of that, and we were very involved in that process leading up to the product launch in August of 2016. I run this on my home SonicWall and have been extremely impressed and happy with it. We run it at our offices. So from a deployment standpoint, because my primary role right now with Cerdant is configuring and deploying new firewalls into production networks, we recommend with every firewall that we deploy that this service is enabled and tuned to the strictest of settings. So let's get into a little bit of what Capture ATP is from a large overview perspective. First of all, it's a cloud-based service that extends the functionality of Generation 6 SonicWalls. So I do want to note there that this is only available for Gen 6 SonicWalls. At this point in time, we do have some customers, and there are quite a few boxes out there that are still Generation 5 hardware. Typically, the biggest indication is the Generation 5 boxes are like the silver and gray boxes. The Generation 6 are the sleeker black-looking boxes. If you're still running on Generation 5 hardware, you're still protected with the existing security services. This, however, is just a service that you can take advantage of. But at this point in time, as you look at product life cycles, I would definitely encourage you to start looking at moving towards a Generation 6 device for a multitude of reasons, one of which being taking advantage of this service. So all that's needed to utilize this service then is the proper firmware and a capture license. This includes a multi-engine cloud sandbox, as you can see here. It has hypervisor level analysis and full system emulation that's built to resist evasion tactics. So mentioning sandbox seems like a contradiction to the point I just made about the decline in sandbox efficacy. But as we go along, you'll see how this solution differs from traditional sandboxing. And since SonicWall hosts this environment, it is scalable and it will evolve. It's architected to dynamically add new malware analysis technologies as the threat landscape evolves. As you can see here, it also has a broad range of file type support, executables, Office files, PDFs, archives, JAR, APK. It also has multiple OS support. So this solves the problem and limitation of only having a single sandbox with a single operating system, traditionally Windows. We're trying to maintain multiple sandboxes. What happens is files are actually sent to this cloud environment for analysis, and then in order to prevent potentially malicious files from entering the network, those files can be held at the gateway until a verdict is determined on whether the file is malicious or not. This is actually an easily configured setting, and once we get to the live demo portion of this, you'll have a chance to see that as well. This service also ties directly into the Grid threat network as part of SonicWall's existing ecosystem. If you're a current SonicWall subscriber, you've got subscription services like Gateway Antivirus, Intrusion Prevention. You know that those are updated all the time and signatures are pushed out. So you're actually already using this Grid threat network to your advantage. In this case, when a file is identified as malicious, a signature is immediately available to firewalls with SonicWall Capture subscriptions to prevent follow-on attacks. So as a Capture subscriber, this is a huge advantage. You're not only leveraging the cloud to analyze and render verdicts on files from your network, but you're also taking advantage of what the Capture cloud sees from other Capture subscribers. In addition, the malware is submitted to the SonicWall threat intelligence team for further analysis and inclusion with threat information that's built into the Gateway Antivirus and the IPS signature database updates. Those have a 48-hour SLA. So technically, if you have an active SonicWall security services subscription, you're already benefiting from the Capture service. But by being a Capture subscriber, you see some even more advanced benefits from that, which we'll get into as we go along. This service also includes its own set of reports and alerts for quick notification of any malicious detections. And during the demo, I'll step through the reporting in some detail. So I do want to stop and take a quick break on what it is and talk briefly about what it is not. First of all, it is not affiliated with the Association of Tennis Professionals. It will improve your security. It will not improve your tennis game. The reason I throw that one in there is because there's some confusion with technical terms. You'll often see APT for Advanced Persistent Threats. SonicWall Capture is Advanced Threat Protection, so it is ATP. And also, it's not very useful for capturing Pokemon. This is actually one of our analysts, Arvin Taylor. He's standing in front of our lab with a Pikachu. And if you've ever spoken with Arvin before, you know he is one of the nicest guys around. When we were doing our in-house training for Capture, the Pokemon Go craze was in full swing. Some of you remember that quite well because you were calling us to block Pokemon Go using SonicWall's application control. which we were able to do for you, by the way. And we actually used this picture in one of our training slides. Of course, I didn't tell Arvin until he got to see it full screen during a presentation, but he got quite the kick out of it. And if you happen to talk to Arvin after this, be sure to give him a heads up and ask him if he's had any luck capturing any Pokemon recently. So let's have a discussion on the actual Capture ATP flow so you can understand how this is actually working within your existing environment. So the first thing that's going to happen as traffic enters the network is that we're going to have to scan the traffic and then do decryption. So here we go again. We're talking about SSL decryption, DPI-SSL. Once again, stressing the fact that this has to happen first and foremost in order for all of our services to be completely effective. At this point, we're going to scan that traffic with the existing security services on the SonicWall. SonicWall security services that you have now are still effective. I don't want to, present the impression that those are no longer doing anything for you, because they are. Simple security services like URL filtering, botnet filtering are still highly effective at preventing access to known havens of malware, for example. From a deployment standpoint, I spend a lot of time deploying new firewalls, and you would actually be amazed at the amount of people that aren't doing simple content filtering. A lot of admins don't want the hassle, or they've been instructed not to cause any disruption for end users. The SonicWall CFS engine actually has a web category for sites listed as malware. I can't think of too many good reasons to allow all of your users to go to known malware sites, but if anybody happens to have one, please send me an email afterwards, and I definitely would like to hear what you have to say about that. At this point, we've kept out the known bad, we allow the known good, and then we have files that are in that gray area as being unknown. These are the files that are then sent to the Capture Cloud for analysis and judgment. So depending on your settings, at this point, they will either be delivered to the endpoint while being analyzed, or they'll be held at the gateway until a verdict is rendered and then delivered to the recipient. So let's actually zoom in and see how file analysis is taking place in the Capture Cloud by using some real data. This infographic comes from Brooke Chelmo, the ransomware czar at SonicWall. It's one that I enjoy a lot. It really drives the point home. It's actually taken from the movie 300. If you're familiar with the movie, it's loosely based on the Battle of Thermopylae and the 300 Spartans there. Those guys in the movie that actually don't wear shirts at any point in time, and they look like they spend all day, every day, just doing CrossFit, which, if you're wondering, if you're staying on a SonicWall for 10 to 12 hours a day like we do here, most of us probably don't look like this. That might be a scientifically proven fact, but SonicWall GUI does not build six-pack abs, unfortunately. So you're not going to get that with your current SonicWall. I'm sorry. In this case, though, the data was actually compiled that we're going to look at from real cloud-based capture information from a single day. So what they did was they took a subset of 300 companies and they pulled the capture data to put together the information that we're going to take a look at now. So in a single day, these 300 companies sent a total of 28,800 files not known to the firewall to Capture for analysis. And if you're doing some quick math, that roughly averages out to about 100 files per company per day. Of those files, 18,100 were unique, and they will actually go through a pre-filtering process before being sent to the sandbox. Once we get to the live demo, this is also going to kind of make more sense. But once we're sending files from the firewall up to the Capture Cloud for analysis, there's actually a pre-filtering process that is taking place before they even actually hit the sandboxes that I mentioned before. So if we're saying that 18,100 of these files are unique, what happens to the other 10,700 files? Those were actually known, or they were duplicates to the capture service, and they didn't require further processing. The file verdict was returned to the firewall, and the file was either blocked or released per policy. And this is where the sharing of info in the Capture cloud starts coming into focus. So as these files are analyzed in the cloud, hashes are created for those files, and then they're stored. So a file that's sent to the Capture cloud might already have been seen, and you're getting an immediate verdict because the hash already exists within the Capture database. Now, of those files, 15,450 were identified as good after further pre-filtering and allowed to pass through the network. They received a good verdict as well. This pre-filtering at this point also includes comparison against a real-time list to see if anyone SonicWall collaborates with knows about these files. And in this particular instance, or this day, 130 were fairly new malware known by the Capture pre-filter, but not by the Firewall's static filters at the time of the scan. But they will be very soon based on the ability to push signature updates to firewalls. After all the pre-filtering, the remaining 2,520 files were sent to the multi-engine sandbox for analysis. And in the demo shortly, we'll see details of what kind of analysis is actually going on. So of these files, most were identified as good, and hashes were created and added to the database so they don't have to be analyzed again. Once again, we're just further adding to the pre-filtering base of information. In this case, 6 files were found to be never before seen malware, aka zero-day threats. Of those 6, they were a mixture of Trojans, a ransomware, a Locky variant, and other malware. So really in near real time, 6 hashes for the newly discovered malicious files were submitted to the Capture database, and all other Capture ATP subscribers were immediately protected from follow-on attacks. These files were then sent to the SonicWall grid team to analyze and create signatures to be added to the gateway antivirus and IPS updates within 48 hours. So just to pause on that for a moment, you know, when we're talking in light of recent events like WannaCry, where we have a global outbreak in a single day, people obviously need to be infected for that to start happening. Companies will start coming up with signatures, and this is where signature-based detection really starts falling behind and why it's becoming obsolete, because there has to be a patient zero for someone to be infected, for someone then to review that file, create signatures for it, and then you have time to deploy it. What we're talking about here is, for example, we have one person that tried to download a WannaCrypt file. It's actually held at the gateway. It's sent to the Capture cloud for analysis. It's seen to be a ransomware variant, so it's prevented from being allowed into their network, but then that hash is immediately created and stored in the Capture database. So globally, any other Capture subscriber tries to download that same file, immediately they have a verdict and that file is prevented from entering the network. So with a global outbreak like that, you really start to see the benefits of this service because you don't want to have to wait for signature updates to be pushed. And it's very possible that malware may be delivered en masse, so it's not going to be just one person. It's very likely that with something like this, multiple networks, thousands of networks, hundreds of thousands of networks will be targeted. And this actually leads to one of the most common questions we get, which is what is the amount of data that is sent to the cloud and what is the speed of the service? In short, cloud-based analysis is actually pretty fast. 2 seconds was the median processing time per file. 83% of files are analyzed with a verdict in under 5 seconds. And an average of 32.6 megabytes was uploaded daily for each organization. That's roughly the equivalent of a 10-minute YouTube video. So when we extrapolate all of this data for these 300 companies, it means they will see 2,450 new malware variants in a year, which is more than 8 per network in this case. So when you consider the ramifications of a ransomware event, for example, it has serious consequences, whether it's financial or to your public reputation. The chance of, taking the chance of seeing 8 new ransomware variants per year is a very scary thing and something that we definitely need to prepare for and something that we're starting to see. It definitely is the new norm. That does it for the slides. I promise I won't go too heavy on them. I hope that wasn't too much slide information for you, but I do want to actually hop over to a SonicWall and take a look at what Capture actually looks like running on one of those boxes. All right. So as you can see here, I'm actually logged into a SonicWall, one of our demo SonicWalls. And we first want to look at the settings screen. As you can see here, Capture is simply another menu item in the SonicWall GUI. We have submenus for status and settings. Reviewing the settings here, we can see the service at the top here is basically an enable or disable service. So it's really just a matter of licensing it and then turning it on. It is worth pointing out that an active gateway antivirus subscription is required for Capture to operate. It operates using the same specified protocols as GAV. In this case, we're using our recommended settings and scanning for all protocols, as you can see here. We have the ability here under bandwidth management to specify file types to include for Capture analysis using a simple checkbox. Our recommendation is to scan for all available file types. We can customize file size restrictions, and we can create object and hash exclusions as well. Of particular note at the bottom here is the custom blocking behavior. This is where we have the ability to block until verdict, meaning that file downloads via HTTP, HTTPS will not be allowed to complete until a verdict has been rendered. In either case, if a malicious file is detected, an email alert will be sent to the specified recipients. So with the Capture service active and block until verdict feature enabled, when a user attempts to download a file, the firewall actually transmits the file to the user, and it also mirrors those files to the Capture Cloud service. What happens is the firewall withholds the last few bits from file transmission until the service returns a verdict. If a good verdict is returned, or if a good verdict is, for the file is stored in the firewall from a prior download and analysis, the firewall will release the final bits, and the file download to the recipient completes. If a malicious verdict is returned, however, the bits are dropped and the file download to the recipient fails. If the firewall does not receive a prompt verdict from the file for the Capture service, the download will likely time out, and the recipient will need to retry the download. The time to return the verdicts will be relatively fast, as we looked at in the infographic just a few moments ago. And if the Capture service pre-filters already have verdicts for that, that's where you're going to get immediate gratification for the end user. However, if the pre-filters cannot determine a verdict, the file is submitted to the sandboxes for execution, for example, and analysis. It can take a minute or more to determine a verdict. So to avoid delays downloading files, this setting, the block until verdict, it can be disabled by the firewall admin. In that case, files are only blocked if a malicious verdict is promptly available. If not, the file download to the recipient will complete, even if a verdict from the Capture service is still pending. Then, when the verdict is returned to the firewall, an event is logged and the admin can be noted via an alert email so they can actually log back in and do some file analysis to determine what kind of information they need to be aware of and respond to the incident as necessary. So we do recommend enabling the block until verdict feature for maximum protection. This may require some user education in how file downloads will behave with this enabled. Our engineers can also work with you to plan the proper deployment and tune this to work best for you and for your particular environment. So with that in mind, let's take a look at the status window to get an idea of what the real-time reporting entails. I do want to point out that this status window is accessible via the SonicWall GUI or via your mysonicwall.com account. This status window shows file scanning history for the past 30 days. So by hovering over any of these bar graphs for any given day, we get the number of files that were scanned and the percentage of those that were malicious. And as you can see here, the lightly colored bars indicate no malicious detections, and the colored bars, depending on the percentage of malicious file found for those particular days, will change in color. Below this bar graph, we actually have file information for whichever day we select. So I'm actually going to go up here and select a date on June 13th. So just by clicking on an individual date, we can see the file detections for that date. And in this case, I'm going to start by looking at a clean file here. I'm actually going to go here on June 13th, and I'm going to choose this particular file, the third one down. When I click this, it gives me a pop-up for this particular file detection, and this is where we really get some insight as to what is actually happening in the cloud. The blue banner at the top immediately indicates the file was not found to be malicious, and below that we see the source and destination IPs and ports for this file. Below that, we actually see what is happening during the pre-filtering process. Files are first passed through a multitude of virus scanners that may already have a hash for the file, and there are also multiple comparisons to reputation databases, vendor databases. Actually, if we shift our focus here to the left, we can see the process involved. This file was not found to be known malware when compared against virus scanners. There was some embedded code found, however, and the file was from either a known reputable vendor or a domain. So at this point, the pre-filtering process that I was talking about is what we're looking at. And in this case, it is inconclusive, and it is determined that the file needs to go to the multi-engine sandbox for actual live detonations. So this is where SonicWall has really innovated the sandbox technology, and where I mentioned it differs from traditional sandboxing problems. There are multiple engines involved in which the file will be detonated in parallel. So we spoke about earlier how malware is now being engineered to evade sandboxing based on various actions or environment settings. Each one of these sandboxes behaves differently. So going back to the WannaCry exploit, for example, one engine might simulate an internet connection while another does not. That's a simplified explanation of how those might differ. But the premise is that you may be able to evade one sandbox. It is highly unlikely that you'll be able to evade two sandboxes, and it's even less likely that you can evade three sandboxes. So in this case, we can see that the file here that we're looking at was actually processed simultaneously in three engines. You see here 3 detonation engines. And it was determined that it could be or it should be detonated in 2 of those engines. Here you can see that it was detonated in the alpha and the beta engines. At the bottom, if I scroll down, we also see some file identifiers. So we actually have the hashes for this now, and this is what's immediately added to the Capture database. So anyone else that needs to have this file analyzed will immediately receive a verdict because this is a known good file. So it doesn't take any longer for that file. In their case, they reap the benefits of the file already being analyzed. It doesn't need to be sent to the Capture sandboxes again. So let's compare that with the malicious detection that we have here on the same date. Once again, when I click on this, we're going to get the similar pop-up. In this case, you immediately see the bright red banner indicating a malicious file was detected. The same pre-filtering process takes place, and in this case, the file was run through 3 engines and actually 4 live detonations. You can see the various architectures for each of those engines here. The red blocks under the engine beta tell us that for the Win7 and XP instances on this engine, the file was determined to be malicious. It's pretty cool to see some of the file detections and detonations for operating systems that you're not typically considering. For example, Android type stuff. I don't have a file listed here because I don't want to go through every single one, but when you look at some of these reports, you will see some of those Android operating systems. So based on the file type, the engine is queued up accordingly, and the files are actually detonated in the proper environments. I'd also like to point out that, as you can see here on the right-hand side, we have the ability to download files to see what was happening with some of these engines. You can download an XML file, which is basically going to contain the information that we're reviewing here. In some cases, you can even view screenshots of the file actually executing, so you can get a real-time look at what this might actually be doing on a virtual system, which is pretty cool. If we have time here in a few minutes, I can even show you a screenshot of one of those that's pretty interesting to see. And we can also download full packet captures of the detonation. What's even further with this particular detection, if we start scrolling down, we can actually review a lot of detailed information on what the engines saw. We get details on what files were being modified on these systems, registry entries processed, libraries, mutexes, functions, all kinds of fun stuff. Lots of detailed analysis information. You can expand some of these and go pretty deep into what the engines saw here. That one was actually a really deep one. I'm going to be scrolling for a while. If we go down to the bottom, we also now have hashes for these files. So in this case, this would have been considered a zero-day threat. So if another Capture subscriber encountered this zero-day threat, they would receive an immediate malicious verdict. There would be no wait time for analysis, as the file analysis doesn't need to run through the pre-filtering and sandbox again like we discussed. This file would be sent to the threat intelligence team, so they would analyze it further, and that's what would be included in the GAV and IPS signature updates to be pushed to all SonicWall subscribers. All right, so that pretty much concludes my presentation and demo portion of the webinar today. This new service is highly effective and it's extremely simple to deploy. SonicWall has done an outstanding job of addressing a very serious problem with a solution that adds a lot of value to existing devices. We recommend deploying Capture ATP as an effective ransomware zero-day threat defense, and our experienced engineers can work with you to ensure our experience translates into a smooth deployment process for you. If you have specific technical questions or need assistance with any of these features, you can contact us. Just submit a ticket in some cases. If you have sales-related questions, be sure to contact your Cerdant rep or email us at sales@cerdant.com. My contact information is here on the screen. Feel free to email me directly. I'd be happy to interact with you in any way, shape, or form after today's webinar. You can also follow me on Twitter. Sometimes I'll post some security updates, especially when we're seeing outbreaks of stuff. With the remaining time that we do have, I will take some questions. And if we don't have enough time to answer each question, we will be sure to follow up with responses in some way. I imagine we're going to archive this presentation on our website, and perhaps we'll be able to post Q&A there as well.
Okay, we have a question here. What about the file list attacks?
Great. Okay, what about file list attacks? I have to double check on that. When we go back and look at the Capture settings, you'll see basically the file types that are supported. We're scanning this on any protocol that the Gateway Antivirus Engine will scan on. So we're talking about HTTP, HTTPS, once again SSL decryption comes into play. So if we're scanning on those, it comes in on one of those streams. And if it's one of those file types, those are going to be the only file types that we're going to be able to scan for right now. So going back and looking at the PDFs, the archives, the JAR, the executables, those are the types of files that this service will be effective against. All right, I have a question here about a Generation 5 device. Someone is asking about an NSA 3500. Definitely contact our sales department for anyone that has a firewall. Basically, if you have a Generation 5 device, it's going to have a 5 in the product name at the end. So Generation 5, 3500 would be a Generation 5 device. The comparable model for Generation 6 would be the NSA 3600. So that pretty much holds true for most of the products across the board. When you're dealing with the NSA devices, you would look for the 6 in the name: NSA 2600, NSA 3600, 4600, 5600, 6600. Speaking of that, it looks like we have another question on which firewalls this is supported on. This is going to be just about every Generation 6 firewall, even the TZ models. So the TZ line and the NSA line. The SOHO device, I don't believe it's supported on the SOHO. And the SOHO is really for a small office, home office, where you maybe have 1 or 2 users sitting behind it. But if you have basically any Generation 6 device, you would have the ability to license this feature and utilize this in your environment. Does Capture detect and block CNC calls? The SonicWall itself is not effective at that. So there's a lot of different factors involved. Capture is not doing blocking of CNC type traffic. It's looking at the actual file itself. So if you have a file that's already on your network, this wouldn't be a defense for that. This would be a defense for files that are entering at the gateway, so new file detections really. There are mechanisms within the SonicWall. I know you mentioned here that the SonicWall is not effective at that. We'd have to research that, and if you're a current customer of ours, we'd definitely like to have a conversation with you on that. So to speak on that for a little bit, because even though we're talking about a new service here, it's not a one-time or a one-stop shop for, we license Capture and now we're completely protected. You still have to have a layered defense. I mean, it's still a conversation that we should be having. The SonicWall itself is not obsolete. For example, your endpoint protection is not obsolete. So as a deployment engineer, it's interesting, especially in cases where I'm dealing with customers that were just using legacy devices. A lot of people are still running stateful firewalls. Maybe they're using an old piece of equipment, or they're using just routers. They're really excited to have the benefit of having multiple security services built into their perimeter defense now. And of course, one of the hallmarks of the security service engine within SonicWall is the gateway antivirus. Well, a lot of customers see that, and their first question is, now that I have gateway antivirus, does this mean I can get rid of antivirus on my endpoint? And the answer is absolutely not. There's still a lot of ways. My simplest answer in that case is there are more ways than just the gateway for people to get access to your network. This is what Josh Skeen spoke about a lot during the security conference, a lot of practical tips and ways you can protect your network. So not to get too far off topic of Capture, but it is a service that fits into your entire ecosystem. So, for example, the SonicWall does have mechanisms built into it that will protect against command and control servers. So to get back to your direct question, if you're saying it's not effective, we would definitely have that conversation. But as a deployment engineer, if you're not using a SonicWall, for example, I would want to audit your firewall and see how the security settings are in place, because there are some simple settings that we put into place with our configurations that will protect against some types of things like CNC calls and those type of things. So we just have to make sure your security services are properly applied and tuned specifically for your environment. So that's stuff that we could definitely address. Let's see here. We have, here's a good one. Someone asked, how long is the file verdict retained by the firewall? So the hash, the firewall itself actually retains the verdict for 24 hours. The Capture Cloud database retains the hashes and verdicts of all files analyzed and uses that information to pre-filter all files sent to the Capture service. We have someone here that asks about testing similarly to the ECAR test virus. Okay, that's a good question. So it's interesting that you mentioned the ECAR test virus, because obviously that's one that everybody talks about as a way to test antivirus products and so on and so forth. I'm actually going to back this up to our demonstration screen, go back into the demo firewall that we have here. You'll see the file analysis here. This is a demo box that I use regularly. As an interesting side note, some of the email alerts that will get fired off can be configured for multiple recipients. So, for example, a lot of our demo boxes are contained with our own personal mysonicwall.com account, and we have multiple people within the organization that are contacts on that account, and they'll actually get emails when a malicious detection is made. Now, the interesting part about this is we do quite a lot of extensive testing for this type of stuff. So when we're running specific tests or when one of our engineers is testing, we might be blowing up the firewall, so to speak, and immediately I'll start getting calls being like, what are you doing? Because I just got flooded with emails. And an exact instance is the date that you see here in the firewall for June 15th. I'm going to hover over this. And you see that there were 54 files scanned that day and 87% were malicious. That was me doing pen testing on this firewall. And I didn't realize I had Capture turned on at the time, and we started flooding some people with emails, and I started getting some immediate calls. So let me actually click on this for you. And I'm going to just pick any one of these files. I'm pretty sure we'll see what you're looking for. Okay. You can start seeing the name of those files there. A lot of these were scripted attacks that were using the ECAR test file to test some throughput on the firewall as far as malicious detections were made. So hopefully that very concisely answers that question. Is 2 gigabytes memory enough for an NSA 2600 Generation 6 appliance to run CFS, DPI-SSL, and Capture-related functions all at the same time? Okay, so that's a great question. I really am not too concerned when I'm speccing a firewall on the amount of memory that's involved. Typically what we're going to start looking at is processing power. So you bring up a very good point. As you start enabling services on any device, whether it's a SonicWall, similar firewall hardware, whatever it is, you really have to account for the overhead that's involved in that scanning. So when you start looking at specs from vendors, you might have throughput numbers, and typically everybody's looking at throughput. I want the maximum amount of throughput. And the first number you always see is some ginormous number that sounds great. It's like, oh, 5 gigs of throughput for this. And you're like, that's awesome. That's what I want. Well, you have to understand that typically the first number that's going to be quoted is what's called stateful inspection, which would literally be no security services turned on in that firewall. It's really just acting as a router or a switch, just passing traffic. So when we start doing specs for customers on sizing firewalls, we start taking into account what we call the total UTM numbers, which would be with all services turned on. Because let's face it, there's no point in buying these devices, these unified threat management devices, and having all these services if you can't turn them on. So the first thing we look at through is the specs on the full throughput for all services turned on. And of course, every time you turn on a service, it's going to degrade the numbers accordingly. So that's all part of proper sizing up front, and that's a great conversation to be having. The other two that you mentioned here, next was like CFS, DPI-SSL. So we did spend some time talking about DPI-SSL. DPI-SSL is very resource intensive. Like I mentioned, I don't want to do a deep dive, but basically what we're talking about is the firewall acting as a sanctioned man in the middle. So when you're talking about encrypting traffic, the firewall actually has to decrypt the traffic, inspect it, then re-encrypt the traffic, and then deliver to the endpoint. So that's a very resource-intensive process. So when you're talking about sizing for DPI-SSL, that's definitely one that we want to have a look at. You're going to be looking at throughput numbers that go down in that case, to be quite honest with you, and there are going to be connection count limitations. So depending on the size of firewall you have, it can only decrypt so many SSL sessions at a time. Obviously, the bigger the hardware, the bigger connection count you have, and the more overhead you have. So these are all part of sizing concerns. But once again, we can work with you to help you tune those systems because they can be tuned. In instances where we've worked with customers in the past, typically we onboard a new customer and they might have tried DPI-SSL, and basically they flipped the switch, they turned it on, and it didn't work as expected because they didn't have the proper planning in place. And it's not the easiest thing to do, but that's where our experience really comes into play. We have the experience, we can work with you to make sure that that happens. As far as the capture stuff goes, this is one of my favorite new features because it's not very resource intensive. So capture itself, it's offloaded to the cloud, so you're really not pushing a lot more bandwidth through the firewall, so you're really not going to see degradation in performance from licensing the capture service. I hope that answers your question. Are there any types of security audits that you guys offer that analyze current SonicWall settings against best practices to keep us better secured? Absolutely. So there's a lot of different things that we do. If you're an existing customer, we actually have some automated auditing that goes on a weekly basis. So, for example, we're making sure that your licenses are current and that your services are enabled and being applied because, believe it or not, there's a lot of customers that will log into their firewall, and for troubleshooting purposes, they might turn off a security service. Obviously, it's not the ideal way to do it, but if you need something to get done and you need it done fast, that's the measure that you take. However, they forget to turn that back on. We audit that regularly to make sure that those services are enabled. Also, if we're onboarding a new customer, we do a complete security assessment of the device, and we will actually present you with a document that shows what our recommended settings would be as compared to what you have now, why we have them in there, and we even make further recommendations on some security hardening that you can do on that particular device. If you're an existing customer and you even would like to have an audit done on your current firewall, we can definitely go over that for you. Just reach out to your Cerdant rep, let them know that you're looking for a review, and we'd be more than happy to have one of our engineers take some time to go through the firewall and make sure that it's configured properly and running as securely as possible.
Also, for non-Cerdant direct customers, we do offer an assessment and remediation service where we essentially will do a full audit of the firewall, present the report that Jason mentioned, and then provide a full 30 days of assistance with additional feature implementation and review and remediation of the items relayed in the report as well.
Okay, we're almost out of time, but there's some great questions here. I do want to hit on one of these real quick. And like I said, we'll go ahead and get some questions answered post-webinar on our website. But someone asked a question about clarification on the 48-hour verdict that I had mentioned, asking if it was 48 hours longer than FireEye or wildfire analysis. That's a great one for me to clarify. So what happens with this capture service is you get immediate analysis on the file, and you get near real-time verdict. So in the case where there's been previous detections, even on the same day, and we have hashes for those files, you get an immediate verdict on that file. In the case where it is a complete unknown that has never been seen by the Capture Cloud before, and it runs through those multi-engine sandboxes that we looked at, you know, the alpha engine, the beta engine, that's going to take a couple minutes probably to process in those engines. With the block until verdict feature enabled, your file will not be downloaded while that process is taking place. That's a security versus convenience trade-off, but it's one that I think is well worth it. In the case that a malicious detection has happened, you're a Capture subscriber, you receive that verdict, and it is blocked. Any other Capture subscribers at that point, send that file up. The hash is already there. They have immediate blocking on that file. So the 48 hours that I spoke of, SonicWall has an SLA for their existing security services. We're talking non-Capture services. Your gateway antivirus, your intrusion prevention. They will take the detections that they made in Capture, and they will include those in those services. Now, those won't be deployed in real time, but there is a 48-hour time window in which, at the longest, they will be deployed. So this is what I mentioned when I said that even if you're not a Capture subscriber, you're going to see the benefits today from the Capture service. You're already receiving those benefits from the Capture service. When I talked about SonicWall having signatures for the WannaCry on April 20th, 20 days prior to when the actual outbreak occurred, those signatures that were rolled out to firewalls were based on detections that were made by the Capture team. So our customers, you SonicWall subscribers, you were protected from WannaCry as soon as April 20th, 20 days prior to the outbreak, because of this Capture service. So even if you're not a subscriber, you are reaping the benefits. You just don't have the immediate real-time benefits that I think you should have and that you definitely would want. So really that wraps up what we have for today. I feel like we could have gone longer. I'm very grateful for everybody taking the time to join us today, for the great questions. We still have some more. We're going to roll those up and get an FAQ put together for you. By all means, please be sure to reach out to us, reach out to your sales rep, reach out to your engineer. We know a lot of you people on a first-name basis. So please give us a call, send us an email. Feel free to reach out to me as well. We'll probably be following up with a survey. We would love your feedback. If this was beneficial to you, please let us know what was most beneficial. Please provide honest feedback for me as a presenter. What can we do to make this more relevant and a better experience for you? And hopefully we can do more of these in the future. But we do appreciate you taking the time today. We definitely appreciate your business and being able to partner with you to help protect your networks. It's a pleasure and an honor to serve all of you, and we hope to continue that relationship for a long time to come. Thank you very much.